David, explain to me how you've gone from one branch in 95 to 27 years later having 100.
I don't know that I can tell you that.
Welcome to the podcast, David Kilburn. Do you think 27 years' time the business will be this size?
Obviously not.
I asked you about what advice you would give yourself 27 years ago, but what would you give entrepreneurs of today that are maybe thinking of taking a step into building their own business? Hello and welcome to the podcast. Today I'm joined by JV and Neil, and I'm also joined by East Yorkshire legend David Kilburn, the founder of MKM Building Supplies. As usual, thank you for all your help. Please like, subscribe, share all of the content. We really do appreciate it. And with all that said, welcome to Tomorrow's Workplace today. Welcome to the podcast, David Kilburn. So I guess I'd like to start at the start, if that's okay. So kind of, I guess out of school, where did your career start? And I guess talk us through that from leaving school.
Well, work-wise, I started in banking here in Hull.
Right. Okay.
I got a job with the Hull Savings Bank, which of course doesn't exist anymore. Came to TSB.
Right.
Part of Lloyd's Bank. So I had a couple of years actually working in banking.
Okay.
Which I think was quite, well, I found it reasonably interesting and actually quite entertaining, strangely enough, because in those days they had, Hull Savings Bank had a kind of branch virtually on every street corner. I don't know how many branches they must have had, but 30 or 40.
But the proper bank manager back in the day.
They did have a proper bank manager.
Yeah.
They never loaned any money though. We never had the facility to lend any money, which was probably very safe.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, and then after your brief stint in banking, what next?
Well, yeah, my parents got moved. Well, my dad got moved to Stockton for 2 or 3 years, and he was working for William Jackson's, and he went to run their factory up in Stockton. So I couldn't afford it. I was, a young kid without too much money, so I had to follow with them, and so I got transferred to the Newcastle and Stockton Trustee Savings Bank, but it wasn't quite the same. And so I just happened to come across it. Well, I had an uncle actually lived in the area, and he was friendly with the I don't know whether in today's terms you probably call him the CEO of a company called Crossfields Building Products, who were a merchant chain based in the northeast, and they were chatting over something, I don't know, I think they were playing snooker or something. He said, we can't get young people to come into the industry, and he said, well, I've got a nephew who's bored stiff working in the bank, and why doesn't somebody at your place meet up with him? And that's how it kind of came about. So I got a job with this merchant chain in Stockton.
Okay.
As you call them in today's parlance, probably management trainee kind of thing. So they put me through all the various departments, and
okay.
They didn't put me in the yard because they obviously thought I was a bit weak. It wouldn't suit me, so I don't like the cold, and I definitely don't like humping stuff around. But anyway, I managed to escape having to work in the yard. But other than that, I probably did everything else you could do, from over various departments. And
okay. And did you settle into a role there, or did you move on to?
No, I stayed with them for quite some time. They had a subsidiary business down in Hull anyway, which is called Dover Townsley's, which were, well, they had two actually, Dover Townsley's and Henry Williamson's, who actually, interestingly enough, Peter Murray, who started MKM with me, who's the M in MKM, Pete was working at Henry Williamson's, and I was working at Dover Townsley's all those years ago, and I transferred eventually from Stockton back down to work for Dover Townsley's, which were in Park Street off Beverley Road, and then eventually became a sales rep for them, and then eventually became their branch manager in Scarborough. So I relocated with the family at that time to live in Scarborough, and actually lived there for 20 years. So
very nice.
But I wasn't a manager for too long. I think it was a couple of years I was there. In Scarborough as the branch manager, and I was kind of approached from Graham Group, who another group of builders merchants was slightly larger, who had a facility in Bridlington, and they said would I join them. So there was a bit of an uplift in salary and various other things, when you and so that's where I went to. So I I worked in Graham's for probably about 10 years, I think. No, it was probably longer than that, 12. Till I got to about 1985, and they had 3 branches. They had Hull, Driffield, and Bridlington. Bridlington tending to be the more senior of the 3, and so that's where I guess admin and various other things were based. And so anyway, I finished up with something like, what do we call it, sales manager or something of that ilk, looking after 3 branches, the sales, the reps, that kind of stuff. And I thought, well, I got to 40 and I can do better than this. So with the help of a good customer friend of mine, I opened a business in Scarborough. Strangely enough, I had a very original name in it. We called it David Kilburn Limited. So
I can see a lot of thought went into that.
Yeah. And I was joined by a good friend of mine that worked at Graham's quite some time, a guy called Jeff Elliott, who was Driffield based. And so I can't remember when it was, sometime in 1985 anyway, we kicked off. And it wasn't long before Harcross, who were another large national group at the time, started knocking on the door, saying, we've always wanted a branch in Scarborough, please will you sell it to us? So I guess the move from being at Graham's to starting my own business was a bit, from my perspective, a catalyst for change, really. So, is this the time to, you're just kind of cruising through life, you're not really pushing yourself, blah, blah, all that kind of stuff. So this kind of the way they presented the opportunity with Harcross seemed like, well, why not? So we sold that business at Harcross. I didn't become a rich man by it, but it was, I saw it as an opportunity. So that's what I did. And joined them in 1985, and then they, with a brief really to open branches north of the Humber. So we opened one in Hull, which is still there. There's a Jewson branch because Jewson bought Harcross in '98, but we opened that branch in '98. And who would I go to get to ask if he would run that was Pete Murray, who of course used to work at Henry Williamson's, and he and I Pete and I were good friends anyway, and he'd worked at Graham's as well, so he joined us all at Graham Group, and then he obviously ran that branch at Clough Road, and this went through. Harcross had 6 regional offices. One of them was in Grimsby, and they had a night of the long knives really, in effect, because they'd had management consultants in, not just in a subsidiary of Harcross. It was part of a conglomerate called Harrison's and Crossfields, and so they had a root and branch consultancy around changing the whole dynamics of the group. And so all the 4 barons of the 4 key businesses that were made up Harrison's and Crossfield were all paid off, and it was changed quite dramatically, the whole structure of the group. Eventually the group has completely disappeared. The only bit that's left is Elementis, who were a chemical company who manufacture all sorts of strange things, but predominantly aerospace, chrome, which anyway, so they got these consultants in, and so we obviously Harcross, because they'd got rid of the barons of the 4 key businesses, of which Harcross was one. They brought somebody else in to run the business, but he was just a button presser really for the restructuring of Harcross, and so they'd shut 3 of the 6 regional offices, Grimsby being one of them. So that I and about 100 others, we were all made redundant because there was no need for any regional centralisation at that time, other than, so the 6 became 3, and we were part of that 3. And like, strangely enough, the guy who was in charge of the enlarged area of Harcross was an old well, I don't know. He and I more or less started at the same time for Crossley, but he brought us all those years back in. I think I joined him in 1963, which seems like a long time ago, doesn't it? And he, I don't think he and I really got on with each other. I don't know. I probably do know why. We're just different kind of characters, personalities. But anyway, I don't know whether he was getting his own back, but he decided I wasn't going to be on his team, so I was made redundant at that time in 1995. And so, what was it? I had to do something, 50.
Yeah.
get
Paid the
another
move.
job, various other things. I'd got commitments like most people have, you've got to put food on the table, pay the mortgage, all that kind of stuff. So I went to see Pete Murray, and who was running Harcross's branch in Leeds Road, which is now Jewson's, which that was. I mean, Pete was hugely successful. I mean, he was running probably the largest in turnover and profit terms of the Harcross branches in the UK.
Right.
Down there in Cliff Road. I said to Pete, how do you fancy starting your own business? The two of us having a crack at it. And he said, yeah, that's a great idea. So, in effect, the beginning of MKM was spawned. We went to buy. I'm just trying what they call them now. Douglas Williams, who none of you will remember because we're going back 1995 now, and they were a business. They had two branches, one in Beverley predominantly, and one not in Stone Ferry, the other side of the river, and can't remember what we call that side of the river. Anyway, it doesn't matter, but they had two branches, and we were talking to them, and so were Travis Perkins. Anyway, Pete and I made some kind of offer. We didn't know where we were going to get the money from, but anyway, we made them an offer. Anyway, they didn't take our offer, and they decided they would take one from Travis Perkins. So the branch in Hull just disappeared. I mean, so I think they shut that fairly quickly, and then their branch in Beverley, which actually hangs behind ours in Beverley, was bought. That was their main branch anyway, and that became Travis Perkins. So then. I had a couple of friends who one of them wanted to put some money in, and the other one offered to build us where we are today, Stone Ferry, so the warehouse and such as that, and lease that to us. So with their help, and Peter and I, we started and in the early stage, because obviously the shed wasn't going to be built immediately, that would take time. You have to get planning permission actually by the site to start with, and for it to happen. And so we rented some premises from Walter Wilson's, who were a Scottish-based plumbers merchants who also sold electrical products anyway. So they decanted that property, and so I rang them up and said, any chance we can, thinking they're never going to lend it to somebody who wants to open in a similar industry. So, but anyway, they did. And so we started in October 95 in that 5,000 square foot shed, which is now opposite the range. The range wasn't there then on Clough Road.
Yeah.
It was, it used to be, I can't remember, it was a car dealership and truck dealership. Anyway, that eventually was knocked down, and obviously the range was built because that was a new building. And so we started there in October, as I say, 95, and there was just 5 of us. Although my wife, Linda, was involved, but wasn't actually physically on site, working and trading with us. But she'd kind of written the business plan and various other things, and she was obviously heavily involved in thinking about, how we should go about things.
And when you set that up, did you think in how many years?
27.
Is it now? 27 years time, the business will be this size? And
No, absolutely, obviously not.
Hi guys, I just want to jump in and talk about a specific area of automation which we often get involved in, which is the processing of supplier invoices, or accounts payable automation as it's also known. Most businesses have invoices that they get sent from their suppliers. Essentially what our solutions do is they read those invoices, they extract key information from them, like purchase order numbers, supplier codes or supplier names. We then use that information and match that up against digital records. So can we find a purchase order number? Can we find a goods received note for that product? If we can, then we can match it up, we can reconcile it, and we can automatically post that into your finance system. What makes us different is that we configure our solutions to be specific to your organisation. So we're not an out-the-box, plug it in and see what you get. We actually understand more about your processes, your organisation, your supplier base, and we configure the solution to meet those requirements. Hopefully that's enough to pique your interest. If it is, get in touch, let's have a chat.
I mean, we'd have to have great ideas of grandeur, wouldn't we, at the time, that this is what was going to happen. And secondly, we'd be probably over-egoing ourselves about what we might achieve. And so Pete and I's objective was, and it was very much a family affair, because Pete's, the only other people that we employed was Peter's partner at the time, is now his wife, Janet. Linda was involved, who's my wife. Andy Beat, who was now our branch director at Beverley, and one other person who he was our kind of plumbing and heating expert. That was predominantly what we did in those first few days, because we were supplying lots of products into Willoughby caravans, which were generally plumbing and heating products rather than building products. And he's the only one, I guess, subsequently who left us. He left us after about 6-7 years. But other than that, everybody's kind of stayed with the business. I mean, Peter sold his shares in 2006 and wanted to do something else. But after a year, Pete said, "Well, I'd like to come back." And Pete, so they just came back and worked kind of, flexibly, if you like, in the business for another, I can't remember now, Pete remember 10, 12 years, until he decided eventually he'd hang up his boots altogether. But he and I remain great friends, and one of our biggest challenges has been Hull City supporters. So you'll see it sat together on Saturday afternoon this week, all being well, when we face Sunderland.
David, you a couple of things. One, you mentioned about your wife Linda created the business plan. Obviously, you said to Steve you couldn't imagine the size of you didn't at that point imagine the business was going to grow to that size. What was the business plan? What were your objectives? What was your
the business plan in the early days? Was obviously it was sort of projections about what we would do with those first couple of years. Obviously going to the banks, and that was really for the sole purpose of that. So, she had that capability. She was a management consultant. So in other words, it's at the end of the day, lots of things it's all about in the presentation, isn't it? What does it look like on paper? Does it make sense to somebody who's listening? We went to, we approached Barclays Bank, who had been my sort of private bankers since I was, 15 or 16. And you kind of, I don't know whether it's the same with everybody else, but you kind of follow where your parents banked, didn't you?
Still do.
My dad was, he banked with Barclays on Beverley Road, so I had an account with Barclays on Beverley Road, and they obviously knew the bank manager then. But of course, by the time we'd got to this, I had no idea who the branch manager was, because they hardly exist anymore, do they? And such as that. So anyway, I approached them. Anyway, they weren't interested. They wouldn't support us. So then we went to HSBC, and they wouldn't support us either. So eventually we landed on the door of Lloyds Bank, and they did support us. So of course, we've in many ways, although you can imagine once we got to this size, debt providers and all sorts of other people are all in the pot. But they do provide banking facilities, and we use them, obviously as administrative of all our throughput of cash and
wise
various
decision
other things.
from
So we're still with them, but the other two rejected us going back all those years ago. So whether they've lost out on that or not, I don't know. Probably.
And the business model of MKM is somewhat unique in terms of the branch structure and ownership structure. Is that right?
Well, we go back to the beginning, because you asked the question when Pete and I started. Were we going to, or would we sort of see in our minds what we've got today? And clearly we didn't. And although Linda always argues that we always did have a plan to have more than one branch, I always say, well, I'm not convinced that we did have that. I mean, we were concentrating obviously on. And when we opened Stone Ferry, the branch that eventually got built in April '97, that was quite a challenge, because we got 20,000 square foot warehousing, and obviously by this time we were growing, because obviously the client base had expanded quite a lot since then. So no, well, I suppose. Prior to that, I got a phone call in, maybe it was 9 months after we'd started, from the guy that had started that business in Scarborough with me, Jeff Ullier, who was running a Harcross branch of in Driffield for them, and he said, it's not the same since we changed everything around. The regions were enlarged, and the management structure's changed, the people, the relationships are all different, blah, blah, blah. Why can't you open a branch in Driffield? So, obviously, Jeff apart from being a colleague, was a good friend as well anyway, and so why wouldn't you explore that? So that's what happened. And fortunately in Driffield, there's a guy I know quite well called Derek Megginson, who was quite a large landowner around the Driffield area, and he used to have a timber unit right in the middle of Driffield, and he had shut that, and we'd used it at Harcross to get a branch open some time before, but on the proviso that we relocated onto his industrial site that he'd built outside of Driffield, and so they'd moved the business over there. So in effect, the site was still available because it was empty. I hadn't leased it to anybody else, and of course, he got planning permission and change of use for a builder's merchant. So all I had to do was negotiate with Derek as to whether or not he was prepared to let us have that site, and of course he was. So that's when I said to Jeffrey, and there'd always been a bit of a guilt feeling from me that with Jeffrey that none of us made anything out of the business in Scarborough, but he'd taken a risk then to leave Graham's to come and start that, and blah blah blah, and so somebody years before that, the boss of Harcross, who was 6'7" old Arovian, used to come on royal visits, and he used to say, the builders merchants business would be much more successful if the people who managed the branches had some skin in the game. And so that always kind of resonated that maybe this was a great idea, but as they were a public company, of course, they couldn't give any of the ownership of the business to anybody else, so they were kind of stuck in this. He'd had this in his mind, but of course he couldn't do anything about it because so I said to Jeff, why don't you take a 25% stake in your own business? And so really that's when, if you like, the business model was formed. So we see MKM as a business of not just, now we've got 106 branches, but actually we don't see them as branches, we see them as 106 separate businesses, and they kind of manage them in their own idiosyncratic way and do things differently, but ultimately at the end of the day, obviously they're supported by the centre, and there is a kind of a circle of not specific rules, but an understanding that you buy from all of the agreements that are made centrally. Clearly all credit control and all that kind of stuff. But, sales and purchase ledgers, all these kind of stuff is all dealt with at the centre. So they just need to really plug in and off they go, and not worry too much about all of the kind of peripheral stuff that would get in the way if you were trying to run and manage your own business.
And it seems quite a unique model from what I know in terms of the building merchant industry.
Yeah, no, none of the others have got anything like it. And of course, they're quite envious of it because obviously it tracks the upper quartile of branch managers in the industry. And why wouldn't you? Because the rewards are life-changing in comparison to if you worked for any of the large national chains.
Why do you think, David? Sorry, why do you think none of the non-PLC type merchants haven't copied that model?
Well, I suppose two things. One is if you're already started your business and you've got more than 10 branches or whatever, you're going to have to give a lot of value away.
Sure.
My experience of people that second and third generation often is not, because often these chains of merchants, independents particularly, of course, obviously are passed from father to son or daughter, and they're very second, third, in some cases fourth, fifth, sixth generation. They don't like giving things away, do they?
That's fair.
So I'm a great believer in you give to get, and if you don't have a mindset that says I'm prepared to give to get, you're always taking instead of giving, aren't you? And to me, there's much more pleasure in giving than getting.
Absolutely. In terms of the industry, you've been close to it for the last 27 plus years actually. What are the big changes that you've seen in the industry over that time?
Well, dramatically. The last 2 or 3 years have seen the biggest changes, rather than the period over the last 27 years. Well, I suppose we often debate this. I mean, the biggest debate often is not, of course, is digital and whether or not that we'll move much onto trading in a digital platform as against face to face or using the obvious telephone or whatever. It doesn't really change a lot. I mean, once you get past the point, from that handwritten dockets. When somebody would come to a sales counter, and then you'd have to kind of process it through a system, and once you got a fully integrated software system, which really we obviously had a fairly simplistic one, as you can imagine, back 27 years ago, because obviously we hadn't got a lot of money to buy something that was sophisticated, but it was an all-in software package, that could invoice people and collect the cash and all that kind of stuff. You put the products on the system and price and the rest of it. As long as you go, things haven't changed much. That still is predominantly much the same. And I mean, the proportion of sales, and we've got a fairly sophisticated. We've just relaunched a new one website. Sales through that medium at the moment is extremely small in comparison to.
Oh, really? I was nodding, thinking you were going to say I've really grown, but wow, that surprised me.
Still extremely slow. And of course, the conundrum is, will our customer base eventually shift more to that style of shopping, or will they stick very much to the traditional method of, I'm going to pick up the phone and speak to Joe, who I know because often as not, there's more questions than answers. Are you sure you're ordering the right product? Or they're asking a question about, I'm not quite sure whether this application, or can you advise me about, how do I do this, or how can I, even experienced contractors, tradespeople, they're not absolutely certain all the time as to what kind of products would be suitable to use in this, and so you can't ask those kind of things. So, or the website would be too complicated. And so I think, and then of course, if you're getting a lorry load of materials and you put it on the web and you just hope that it's going to arrive because you put, well, I'd like it for 10 o'clock on, blah, blah morning, and you've got 10 people waiting for it. I don't know. I think there's an element of, I want physically to hear somebody say it's going to arrive on time at 10 o'clock tomorrow. I'd rather than just depend on, I don't know, but nobody knows the answer to that. I mean, clearly it will grow over time because, kids today, they spend their time on tablets, don't they? And so, so really, we see it as it's a have to have, and it's as of today, and so therefore it's bang up to date. And obviously, we're still working at it, loading more products, using social media more and all that kind of stuff. So we're well into all that kind of stuff, but
your customers still prefer that. Big
so
phone
it's
have a conversation.
Yeah, well, I suppose it's like most businesses. You've got to have every channel open, haven't you, so you can do business. And at the moment, the preferred channel for most people is, I would say, would be the phone, predominantly, mobile phone, followed by people who collect the goods.
It's interesting that, because knowing Pete is obviously a big relationship person. He's a big networker. He knows a lot of people, and I think it's one of those where giving that good advice, if you just, you need to be speaking to Pete type of thing, pick up the phone, have a chat to him. Oh, Pete, what would you do in this situation? I need this, and this by then. Oh yeah, I'll leave it with me. I'll get it sorted type of thing. And it's
there's a confidence bit about that.
Yeah.
And people, I don't know about you. I like having friends, don't you? I don't want to go. I'm not a work from homer, so I'm not of an age that. But to me, I think work colleagues, camaraderie, all these kind of things. I think they're very much the pyramid of life, aren't they? So if you suddenly, this is one of the things that worries me about today's world, that people working from home, that whole camaraderie thing that you've got during the working environment is hugely important. And the other thing is learning.
I was going to say, that being able to overhear a conversation and in your industry, to be able to go, oh, he's just advised him that's that. So next time someone asks that person, you can go, oh, actually, that's the advice I'm going to share. And you're right, the working from home, which obviously became way more prominent through COVID, on the back of COVID, has the ability to dilute the learning within the office to then share with customers, if you like, and that is a worry down the line.
But of course, in the world we have now, recruitment of people is, the pond is becoming smaller that you can recruit good people from. They're a bit more demanding because, there's a shortage of good people about what they want to do, and so sometimes you've got to acquiesce in the fact that some of them want to work part-time from home and whatever, so you've got to accept the inevitable. But I personally, if I stay at home, even now, I feel kind of guilty that I'm, sort of not working properly. But I mean, I would never work from home because I just, when I was I never used to do my homework when I came home from school because I
Needed to.
to me it's an imposition of time. Home is my home life and work is where I work, and I don't want them, to cross over. Really, I've never been able to work from home.
How active are you in the business currently? Are you still?
Well, we got a very good new CEO, who came in a couple of years ago. Her background was in construction. Really, she's been around the construction industry for the last 20 years. Latterly, Kate was she was running Billbase, who were a competitor of ours, part of the Grafton Group, based in Ireland, and then she left them and went to work as the MD of Ibstock Brick, who are PLC. And then we got in discussion with her about joining us. Don't think Ibstock was really her space. She preferred, I think, the cut and thrust of the merchant industry. So Kate joined us a couple of years ago, and that's a fantastic find really for MKM, because obviously succession planning was a massive issue really, and we'd had a couple of goes before, and hadn't quite worked out. So it's great to find somebody who, apart from the fact he's doing a great job, is somebody to get on with as well, which is massively important. So my day-to-day activity is kind of, I float around under the title of founder, whatever that means. But I like to think I'm a bit of the gatekeeper of culture, which I see is hugely important to MKM. With Kate and I, we go and look at all the physical sites before we agree that there's where we'll go, and we interview all the teams that are obviously going to open our new branches. Right. And we do that together, and various other things. We do incentive holiday schemes and various other things, which are quite big, major things that we do every 2 years. So I kind of tend to sort of run with those, and we also have we have our branch directors meeting once a year. This year we took everybody to Portugal for a couple of days, and it's not for a jolly, it is for a serious kind of, and that's really the only time in a collective sense that we get the branches together, because they are independent businesses working on their own. We don't have a hierarchical management structure, which Pete and I decided right from the beginning we weren't going to have. So if you work for one of the nationals, you have area management, regional management, national management, and so to have 7 or 8 layers of management before you got to the CEO. That what happens in MKM is theoretically they report directly to the CEO really, in terms of that. So
how easy is it to maybe not let go of the reins but loosen the reins when it's been your baby for 27 years?
Well, I mean, obviously that's difficult, and you've got to have a mindset that says, I mean, I could be, sometimes you think, well, I don't want to be a Ronaldo, the latter stages of your career, when you've scored a few goals.
Hanging on.
Well, hanging on is one of them, and the other thing is sulking around because I actually agree with what that's and that and whatever. I've kind of tried to leave all that kind of stuff behind, really, and I've got to be a bit of a realist in that sense. But I mean, if somebody was to say, do you wish you were still running the business, the answer would be, on a day-to-day basis, the answer would be yes. But on the other hand, we sold a substantial part of the business, a majority stake of the business, to Bain Capital, who are a large private equity. So in effect, they call the shots, and at some point, with private equity, of course, it's a transactional situation. So in 5 or 6 years, from whence 2017, we're heading towards potentially another transaction in a year, 2 or 3 years, depending, I guess, what the economic climate's like at the time. Well, you're not going to gain maximum value from turning out somebody who's 77, are you? So you've got to have a good succession plan in place, and you've got to have the right team. So, we like to think, all of us, because I'm really aligned with Bain. We're both investors, aren't we? In effect, that we've got absolutely the right team, and when the button's pressed to say the business is potentially for sale, then somebody looks at it and says that's absolutely, because I guess the two things they're looking for is is there a management team in place that can actually take it to the next level, and then what the opportunities for growth in this business, and so those are the two key things. Apart from the fact that all the peripheral stuff that goes with a larger business today, that when we first started you would never dreamt would be part of it, ESG and all of the kind of things that corporate governance, all these things are huge today. You can't avoid them. You've got to make sure, and your business got to be clean as a whistle. Don't think you can fiddle this and juggle that around. Once you get to the size we are today, everything has to be right on the bottom.
And David, what are the growth plans? Is there still ambitions to grow further afield?
Absolutely, yeah. No, there's huge growth plans. I mean, we've got a huge pipeline of teams who want to open branches for MKM. We don't operate in a white space environment, so we're not looking for, we haven't got a branch in X, Y, or Z.
Yeah. Okay.
All we're interested in is the people.
Right.
Because the people own the goodwill of a business, and certainly in builders merchants, not just the branch manager, but if they've got a good team, they've obviously got the relationships with the customer bases as well. Yeah. So we because it's such an attractive proposition, the environment's much better. I mean, I don't know if you've ventured into an MKM branch at any time.
Have recently, yeah.
And the other thing is make a comparative, and so if you try Travis's or Jewson or whatever it is to see, one of the things we pride ourselves in the level of service that we provide. Hopefully in every branch now, I'm sure we do, because we get lots of brickbats back from our customers about service levels and the rest of it. And we don't manage the business by spreadsheet management either. So if you do X amount of that, doesn't mean this is all you can have in terms of numbers of people and trucks and the rest of it. We allow them to make all of those kind of decisions. So we often have far greater resources on the ground to be able to deal with anything that's thrown at us. So all of those kind of things are critical to us. That
you must have learned a load of lessons, I guess, over the last 27 years. If you look back, what advice would you give yourself 27 years ago when you first set up MKM?
What advice? I don't think that we would have changed a lot from where we are. Why would we? Because the formula's been hugely successful, and I mean, in the nicest possible way, this is a fairy story. Because Pete and I, a couple of local lads that kind of started a builders merchants in Hull, finished up with, and it's not just Pete and I, but the Linda and Jana and Andy B and Richard at the time, and other people that helped and supported us in those early stages. And don't forget, and then the manufacturers. You can imagine some of the issues that we had in those early stages of, we'd like a credit account, we'd like some sensible terms to be able to trade. Oh yes, well, what kind of track record have you got? And so lots of it we're very dependent on the relationships that we had built up over years before that, working for somebody else. So it was a trust issue, and so there were lots of major manufacturers that were helping us, and even on through the back door if they could, rather than and so they were coming under lots of pressure from people like Harcross and predominantly Harcross, because obviously that's where we come from. Not to give us accounts.
Really?
Oh yeah. And they were put under pressure about if you supply them, we'll destock you and all that kind of stuff. So and of course then the rumours have gone on ever since, from Juice and Stravises, various other people, they always say to their people they'll bust tomorrow, they won't last. It's not going to, all that kind of stuff. They put the fear of, or tried to put the fear of God into people who were considering coming to us and all that kind of stuff. But we've just kind of ploughed down furrow and ignored them, not in an arrogant way, but if you think that 27 years ago we didn't have a single branch, and we didn't have a single customer. Now we've got a never-ending level of customers, 106 branches. Next year revenues will be, we like to think we'll touch $1 billion. So
not bad.
what were the others doing during that 27-year period? Because ultimately we've nicked it from them, haven't we? And we've done it because I'd like to think we do it better than anybody else. And so, but that isn't that what any business is. And we are one of the things that we always, because we, Kate and I, and another guy, John Samuel, you'll know John, who works for us. We always go and do an induction on every new team before they open, usually about 6 weeks beforehand. So we meet all the team, and we have a general chat about it, talk about where do we come from, where are we now, where are we going, kind of thing. So that everybody, the guys that work in the yard, and the drivers and all that kind of, they're all included. And then we have a bit of lunch together and all that, and then we go and see the new branch and blah blah blah, and get a feel for it and the rest of it. But I always finish off my bit with that quote from the Greatest Showman, which at the end of it he says, nobody ever made a difference by being the same as anyone else. And so and to me that's just a hugely important statement. And I think if there was anything that summarises what we've done over these 27 years, is that we've been different, because we've created a much better a working environment, not only in the sense with the branch directors in the team, because they're uncluttered by unnecessary central suffocation, because it's not a command and control business at all. It's completely the reverse. That they're the most important people in the business, and we don't have a head office. It's just called central support. And it's literally there to do that. It's not there to, if you work for any of the nationals, he'll tell you, a branch manager, the first 3 hours of every day is responding to 100 emails from a faceless person that sits in their head office, asking banal questions that if they knew anything about the industry, they wouldn't ask in the first place. But if these people don't respond, they're fearful that at the end of the day somebody will feel the collar and they'll be in trouble. So the first 3 hours of that. Whereas with us, there's none of that. Nobody's allowed to harass. The only thing is give them the information they want and leave them to get on with it, because they're the experts in the field. So that's kind of how we made a difference. And the other important thing is that we try and find locations which are not on industrial estate. They are main road frontage. So locally here, if you went to have a look at the branch, Anlaby, of course, is right in the middle of the retail sector. Stone Ferry is on that main
very busy
north
road
to south visit, and Beverley, if Swanmore Lane is right in the middle. So we don't try and hide ourselves away in industrial estate, because at the end of the day, we're as open to the public as we are actually to the tradespeople. And I still think to this day that the general public do have a fear of shopping with us, because maybe they think you've got to have a trade card or something like that. But we have some wonderful showrooms, and and we do sell right across the product range that most other merchants don't. So you can buy a kitchen, a bathroom, central heating boiler, radiators, timber, heavy building materials. You can even, in some branches now, because we're introducing that at the moment, electrical products and plant tyre. So
Well, David, I've got a question for you. Two pronged question here. One is, during your early part of your creating MKM, did you have any sort of business idols, if you like, that you sort of admired and you followed? So that's one part. And then the second part is, some of the successful business people in the world now, are there anyone you admire and think, do you know what, they've done a good job?
Well, one of the things that triggered, I guess, my thinking and probably gave me a kick was when I was with Harcross and we were introduced to a video that the chief exec of Harcross or Harrison Crossfields said had to be distributed to all the senior management to watch was Tom Peters in a video called A Passion for Excellence. I don't know if any of you have ever seen that. I mean, if you watch it now, you'll see it's quite. It's quite a crackly old thing, but you watch it. And in my head, it inspired me to think, well, I could do better than currently I was doing in terms of what I was doing, and secondly, I don't know, he talks about so much common sense, and ultimately at the end of the day, that people spend the money with people they want to spend it with. They don't spend it with people they don't want to spend it with. And so if you can create an environment of where I'd like to spend my money with you because then business would be much more successful. So I guess Tom Peters, apart from I've seen him physically as well when he's been over here, but he's quite a famous American business guru, and has obviously written loads of books and various other things. So he would be one of them. I'm not so much inspired by other. I don't kind of fall over and everybody says, "Oh, I wish I was Richard Branson," or "I wish I was, Bill Gates," or any of those kind of people. Steve Jobs. It's all kind of trendy to be, in that kind of camp. I'm more inspired by individuals and people, and the likes of Kennedy, the likes of Martin Luther King. I think he was such an amazing man in terms of what he did. Those kind of people, Mandela, and those kind of people to me are much more. I don't know. They inspire me more than thinking around, what I think of Bill Gates and the rest of it. They're almost kind of somehow they got themselves into something that suddenly exploded. And were they actually good business people, or had they actually somebody had hit on a great idea and happened to be in the right place? I don't know, but it's not. They haven't built something of what I'd call. Subsequently they built, or the whole thing has been built. But if you've got a commodity that nobody else has got and it's absolutely unique, in effect, that's what they did. All of those kind of people. And but no, I don't. There's nobody. I don't think that from a that sense. I would say that I do believe, because I think the world. Kennedy played a massive part. I was thinking because I talk about this occasionally if anybody's talking to me about. If you go back to 1955, I was 10, and suddenly we were listening to all sorts of. Silly little songs that people like Al McCogan and various other people would be singing, 20 tiny fingers, 20 tiny toes, kind of. You would have never have heard these kind of songs, but and then suddenly out of the blue, a screen comes up and there's Elvis Presley, kind of singing Jailhouse Rock or Heartbreak Hotel. And it was absolutely transformational. I can't tell you. Suddenly we were all teddy boys, and people wore different clothes and politicians suddenly, like Kennedy, appeared, and he was a young, good-looking, handsome. He was of our era. It wasn't of, the Macmillans, the Eisenhowers, all those kind of people. They were all men to us. It was all transformational, and obviously the obvious things like the Beatles and the Rolling Stones, and Man on the Moon. You think about the '60s and the '70s. Just think, tell me what happens now. It's just bloody boring, isn't it? It's not the same. You imagine. We're sat here in 2022, aren't we? Coming up to Christmas, and you just think, what is going on out there?
You grew up in the right era. Yeah.
What is going on? How can you square the circle of, would I have ever thought in my lifetime that we'd be faced with, Russia at war with and Europe? Would we ever be faced with strikes again of the nature that seems like it belonged in the 70s? The kind of people that were operating in the 70s, haven't we become more sophisticated and sledgehammer action from trade unions to try and, make people. Surely we're a bit more sophisticated than that.
You'd like to think.
Seems not.
Why do we live in a disrupted society?
What about I asked you about what advice you would give yourself 27 years ago, but what would you give entrepreneurs of today that are maybe thinking of taking a step into building their own business? What advice would you give those individuals?
I don't know that I'd give other entrepreneurs advice, because I don't really. What is an entrepreneur? Because I've never seen myself as, and I wouldn't. I got onto being an entrepreneur because I wouldn't have got 50. I wouldn't have got to 50, being an employee for everybody else. Could have had that kind of. I want to be. I think lots of people start their own business, and I think that's a slightly different issue about what is an entrepreneur. He's probably an entrepreneur is the guy that was smoking fags behind the bike sheds at school and was selling cigs to the other kids and various other things, and that's kind of entrepreneurial, making a few quid where they can and ducking and diving. But I think lots of people start their businesses because circumstances probably they haven't got a lot of alternative, and some of them might be economic. I need to do something because I can't, or you're made redundant like I was, or might just get the sack. I don't know, but all those kind of things. So, I think the advice is that if you start a business, you don't ever become complacent, and always look for growing the business. Never become static, because once you've stopped growing, then eventually you start to retract and you'll start to go backwards. So my advice would be, continuously looking for growth.
I think on that point we will leave it there. But thank you very much for coming in.
Thank you very much.
Really appreciate it.
Okay.